evening, everyone, and welcome to the final debate between hopefuls for the Vermont House of Representatives in Lamoille County and Washington County. My name is Tommy Gardner. I'm the news editor for the News and Citizen and the Still Reporter. And joining me tonight in moderating duties is managing editor Jesse Ferron. This debate is between the four people running for two available seats in the Lamoille-Washington House District, which represents the towns of Elmore, Morristown, Woodbury, and Worcester. We have two incumbents, both of them Democrats, Avram Patt of Worcester and Dave Yacovone of Morristown. Challenging them are two Republicans, Shannara Johnson and Tyler Machia, both of Morristown. Tonight's debate is being live streamed on the News and Citizen Facebook page and is being recorded by Green Mountain Access Television, as well as our paper for future viewing by anybody who misses it live tonight. The debate will proceed as follows. First, the candidates will present their opening statements. Then we'll have a number of questions from the moderators, interspersed by a couple rounds in which the candidates get to ask each other some questions. Any rebuttals or follow-ups will be up to the discretion of the moderators. At the end, candidates will have brief closing statements and we'll be on our way. So let us start.
Sure do. Let's hear from you. We're going to start this process with Shannara, and you're going to have 2 minutes. So I'm starting the clock.
Okay. I'm Shannara Johnson. I'm a Native American, I'm a native German, I'm sorry, and a proud US citizen. I've been to in the US 21 years. I've lived in Vermont for 18 years. I work as a copywriter for a publisher of investment newsletters, and so I'm particularly interested and sort of informed about economic and financial things. The reason I'm running is that I used to be a liberal, but after 2016, I basically walked away from the Democratic Party. America is known as the land of opportunity, basically all over the world, and we have this enormous freedom here, and that's why most immigrants come here. But recently I watched Democrats shift farther and farther to the left, and I find it kind of scary how pervasive the idea has become that government should rule every aspect of our lives and decide what we can or cannot do, say, or think. There are a lot of hardworking Vermonters who feel that they don't really have a representation in Montpelier anymore. Those are the people who love America, who love their families, who want to keep their constitutional rights, who want to keep their guns, and who just want to be left alone, basically, and keep enough of their hard-earned money to make a decent living. But in this cancel culture climate, if you disagree with the far left narrative, you're being called names. Some people will actively try to destroy your life. And many Vermonters I know are afraid to speak their mind because they're afraid to lose their jobs. They're afraid to lose their business. And at some point, I just knew I had to stand up and speak up and be a voice for those people.
Okay, thank you. And Tyler, I've reset the clock. You've got 2 minutes.
Thank you. Well, I first just want to thank everyone for participating today, News and Citizen Still Reporter for helping to put this on, as well as everybody who's watching at home. My name is Tyler Machia. I'm a lifelong Lamoille County resident. I'm 30 years old. I live here in Morrisville. I've been in Morrisville now for about the last 3 years. I was lucky enough to be able to purchase a house last year, and I have an 8-month-old son named Theo and my wife Carla. We all live here. And really the reason I got interested in running kind of started back a couple of years ago, right around the time of the Act 46 process. And what I really just saw is, I think, a massive expansion in both the size, scope, and power of state government. And I think that that's really come in many ways at the expense of local communities in their ability to have a meaningful impact on policy decisions that are going to directly impact them. And I think we've seen this play out, again, and as I stated before, in education through the Act 46 process. We see it in healthcare with the creation of the Green Mountain Care Board and and centralizing more and more decision making there. And we also see it now with the Global Warming Solutions Act, where we've essentially created and empowered a 23-member board that's going to be given broad authority to have dramatic impacts on policy across the spectrum in Vermont. And I don't think that that's right. I think that government that's strongest should be closest to the people. And I think that the more and more we empower unelected boards and bureaucracies, the less access and accountability that the public's going to have. And if given the opportunity to serve, I'm going to work as hard as I can every day to fight against that.
Okay, thank you. Avram, you're up next. 2 minutes.
Okay. Good evening. I'm Avram Patt. I'm running for re-election for one of our 2 House seats because I care about our future, about the well-being of Vermonters and the environment and that we and future generations will live in. In my 2 terms in the House, I've served on the Healthcare Committee and more recently on the Energy and Technology Committee, which is about as broad a range of issues as one could have in terms of the intensive committee work. And in my jobs before being elected, I did spend some time on various issues in the State House, and that's where I learned about the process and the frustrations and the compromises that have to be made in order to legislate. And I do know that in Vermont anyway, we often find common ground with people that we differ with, and that's how we get things done in Vermont. Thank you.
Thank you. And closing out the opening, Dave, 2 minutes on the clock.
Thank you. With a name like Yacovone, I'm used to being at the end and going last. Thanks for having us. I'm not running against government or anyone or anything. I'm running to help keep communities strong, where neighbors matter and where children can be safe. Vermont is special. I know the balance between a helping hand and a handout. It was Muhammad Ali who said, "The service we do for others here on this earth is the rent we pay to be on this special place. The rent is due. I want to try to pay it forward and help others." Abraham Lincoln said, "The legitimate object of government is to do for a community of people whatever it is they need to have done, but cannot do it all in their separate or individual capacity." These are the values that drive me. These, among others, are the reasons I am seeking re-election. Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Okay, now on to questions from the moderators. You'll each have up to 2 minutes to answer the question. And we're going to start this. We're going to go down the line and rotate the last to the top. So, starting with Tyler Machia. Tyler, the country is in the middle of a pandemic-related recession, but some say Vermont's economy has been flagging for years. And as the population gets older and aren't replaced by a younger workforce with money to spend, what can the legislature do in the next session to jumpstart this economy?
Thank you, Tommy. That's a great question. And it's something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about, and really kind of what I think is the real key to this is, again, coming back to what I opened with, which is, again, empowering local communities and giving them more authority to create unique policy solutions that better address their needs. When you have a lot of top-down and one-size-fits-all decision-making in that comes out of Montpelier, you lose some of the nuance and some of the unique needs, I think, that are in local communities. One thing I'd be really particularly interested in is giving local towns more flexibility to maybe exempt some development projects from Act 250, use more access to TIF funding, and giving them more broader authority to kind of implement regulations or other policies that are going to help grow businesses in their state. And I think we need to be much more creative about how we use our tax code. Right now, I think it's very much used as I think in many ways kind of as a stick. And I think if we used it as carrots through tax breaks for businesses that are doing the right things, that are paying their employees higher wages, that are paying them, that offer them paid family leave and allow them to deduct that off of their business taxes at the end of the year for doing the right thing. I think we can come up with a lot of really innovative solutions. But again, it shouldn't come from the legislature. And I think the legislature really needs to learn that when they need to take a step back and be patient and give local communities the ability to kind of create their own solutions. While I was living in Cambridge, I worked on the Cambridge Community Engagement Team, which really helped spearhead and broaden access to Vermont's town meeting day traditions, which is something I'm very passionate about. And I really think that type of model can be good to help drive growth. Another thing I'm really interested in, if you look at the Vermont Council on Rural Development, they've done this community engagement model where they really sit down with communities and do an analysis of the community's needs and resources. And I think trying to codify more of that sort of process in state law, or to put some state money behind it, I think we could broaden that out across the entire state and really see dramatic growth in locally driven economic decisions.
Thank you, Tyler. I did forget to mention, if you want, I will give everybody a 20-second kind of warning. So I don't want to interrupt you, but just
maybe like a hand or something, so that way it doesn't throw off the train of thought.
Absolutely, yep. Next up is Avram Patt. Avram, the same question for you. What can the legislature do in the next session to jumpstart the economy that's been flagging for years?
Well, one of the things the legislature does, and I fully support the kinds of activities that the Council on Rural Development and more local community and regional-based organizations do, very aware of what the council has been doing. But with that said, it's state money to a great degree that supports those activities, the coordination and implementation of what people in the local areas come up with. More specifically, though, I look to places that are actually changing and where areas that have been seeing growth in economic development. And in particular, I see it in diversified agriculture and food-related, much more locally sourced food systems, both in terms of the growing and the processing and the selling, and not sending all of our food dollars out of state. And the one last thing that we have to get to eventually that will have a huge impact, particularly on rural Vermont, as long as it takes and as difficult as it is to do, is to get high-speed internet to the last mile. That will be a huge economic stimulus. Thanks.
Thank you, Avram. Next up, we have Dave Yacovone. Dave, what can the legislature do in the next session to jumpstart?
Yes, thank you. To jumpstart, well, there's a couple of different things. Avram touched on it, but I want to expand a little bit. Nearly 85% of everything we spend in Vermont for food goes out of state. Nearly 80%, nearly $1.5 billion of everything we spend for fossil fuels goes out of state. We need to have strategic investments to capture those dollars, to redeploy them in Vermont. That will be a huge jumpstart to our economy. It will not happen overnight. It will take a number of different investments to do it. But if you always do what you always did, you'll always get what you always got. And that's frankly, to me, too much of the status quo. We need to make strategic investments. Additionally, and I'm hoping I'm hoping very much so, that there will be a change in presidents come November. I'm hoping that our policies on immigration will change. We need to frankly have buses at the border ready to help people into our country, to create welcoming communities here in Vermont, to help folks adapt to our culture, adapt to our weather, if possible. But that's the labor force in strong part for the future. We can have all the tax credits and deductions, which businesses already take, we want, but if there aren't the workers here, it really won't matter. So that's an important workforce development is critical going forward. among many other things, but those are a couple. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Shannara Johnson. What can the legislature do in the next session to jumpstart the economy?
So my plan to jumpstart the economy is, first of all, fully reopen our economy now, immediately. Cut all non-essential spending, lower taxes, and reduce regulations to attract more people, companies, and jobs to Vermont. Trim the fat off our bloated bureaucracy and strengthen the private sector. Make living in Vermont more affordable for middle-class family and retirees, and stop micromanaging Vermonters' lives and put freedom first. And I would like to expand on that a little bit. Whenever I say that, people tell me, oh, you don't care about our lives, you only care about money. And I really have to explain this. The economy is our lives. Because the economy is everything Vermonters do to survive and prosper. The economy is the farm next door, it's Hannaford's, it's El Toro, it's Union Bank, it's Pizza on Main, it's your Airbnb, it's your vendor at the craft show, it's your plow guy, it's your cleaning lady. They're all the economy, okay? The economy is us, basically. And you can't indefinitely shut things like that down and then open back up. It's like somebody's heart stops. I mean, you only have so much time to do a CPR before there's not enough oxygen flow to the brain and the patient dies. And we're pretty close. And there is a point of no return from where there's no coming back. And we need to fully reopen now. We need to bring back events. We need to bring back tourism. We let people go about their lives and protect those who are the most vulnerable, so nothing happens to them. And hopelessness is actually a huge factor of death in Vermont. Suicide is the second leading cause in Vermont for people ages 10 to 44, and that is very sad.
Thank you, Shannara.
The United States Congress has not been accused of being the most efficient legislative body these days, and political impasses have slowed down any flow of federal aid in the pandemic. How can Vermont go it alone without being able to rely on Congress for help? And this question is another 2-minute answer period, and we're going to start with Avram.
Well, I think the very frank answer is that Vermont can't go it alone. Vermont and other states are partners with the federal government in terms of funding and programs, healthcare, Medicare, Medicaid. We can't simply go it alone and just say, oh well, Congress can't get anything done, and so we can't simply replace that. So I think, as Dave alluded to earlier, there needs to be a change so that we do not have this gridlock. We don't have that here, as I said earlier, in Vermont, in our legislature. We disagree. There are some controversial issues where there are big disagreements. I'm always amazed at the overwhelming number of bills that pass on either unanimously or close to unanimously. So we can get things done here. We need to make some changes in Washington so that people get busy working with each other and not stalling and gridlocking everything.
We're going to go to Dave, 2 minutes. I can repeat the question if anybody needs me to.
I think I'm okay. We can't go it alone. That would be disastrous for us. We're very fortunate with something called the small state minimum, which Senator Leahy established so that small rural states like Vermont get their fair share of money. In fact, with the COVID relief funding, Vermont, I think, received the second highest funding. That $1.2+ billion was critical for stabilizing Vermont. The patient's not fully recovered yet, but we're on our way. Can you imagine if we didn't have Congress or the federal government to help us during this pandemic? Now, we may be the hardiest of independent Vermonters there are, and we're proud of that. But without support from the federal government, it would not be a very pleasant picture for us. Now, there'll be people who complain, understandably, about the federal regulations, that they're onerous, that we may not care for the policies that come. But Vermont has approximately a $7 billion annual budget. 1.7 billion are state funds. The rest are all fees and federal dollars. We would have a very difficult time providing the support. We imagine the roads that we struggle with now, what they would look like without any federal assistance. We need to be good partners with the federal government. It's critical. Thank you.
Up next is Shannara. 2 minutes.
Well, as I said before, I think we need to fully reopen our economy, and we need to do it now. And for anyone who wonders how that could be done, the COVID numbers actually look really, really good. The last COVID death that we had in Vermont was 3 months ago, excuse me, on July 11. Total COVID deaths in all of Lamoille County since the beginning of March, exactly one death. Total COVID deaths in 2020 was 58. So last Sunday, actually, 3 foremost scientists, one from Harvard, one from Oxford, one from Stanford, all of them epidemiologists, and 35 co-signers who were also professors, immunologists, epidemiologists. They published the Great Barrington Declaration, and they basically say, all of them, you must open the economy, end the lockdowns now, let people get infected because we need the herd immunity, and let the vulnerable, people in nursing homes be tended to by caregivers who already acquired herd immunity, and everyone else just go about their business. And that's what they basically say. There are over 15,000 signers now of the petition that are medical and public health experts, medical practitioners, and so forth. Yeah, so that's what I would recommend.
And Tyler, you're last on this one. 2
All right,
minutes.
awesome. Well, thank you. So just as a brief aside, I think that one death, I believe in Lamoille County, might have been former Representative Bernie Jeskowitz from Cambridge. So just, I knew Bernie personally a little bit, having lived in Cambridge. So I know, I'm sure Avram and David knew him as well from serving with him. So that was, an unfortunate casualty, even though it's just one. That being said, though, I think what this argument really highlights is that the need for why we need to have more local decision making, because again, when you centralize more and more power and decision making in the hands of fewer and fewer people, and you become dependent on that, government becomes less responsive. And that's just the nature of it. We have a country of 300 million people, with states as diverse from everything from Vermont to California and everything in between. Vermont is in Texas, Texas is in Illinois, Illinois is in Massachusetts. The needs of these communities are unique and different. And the more we try and do this from a top-down, one-size-fits-all approach, the worse your options are going to get. And it's true, David, we do draw down federal money, but rather than putting all those strings to it, and I think as members of the legislature have advocated for, is giving states more flexibility to use those funds in particular ways to meet their needs is good policy. And likewise, the state giving local communities more control and more influence over money and policy is good policy, because it allows people to tailor the needs to the communities, helps to make people feel more empowered, and that they're active agents, and that they're not just, passive recipients of edicts from Montpelier or Washington, D.C. It helps breed, engaged citizens. And I just see time and time again that more of those opportunities are being taken away from people. And we sit back and, and throw our hands up at the dysfunction in Washington. Washington, D.C. was never designed to function efficiently. That's the whole point of our system of government, is it's slow, it's cumbersome, it takes time. It's because it's supposed to, because again, government that's strongest is supposed to happen closer to home where it's stronger to people and you create better policy outcomes that way.
Thank you.
Sorry, I got my water down there, so don't knock it over.
Okay, so this is the first of what's going to be 2 rounds in which you candidates are going to be able to pose a question to one of your opponents. Your opponent will have up to 90 seconds to answer. And for the audience's sake, and as I've told the candidates, in the second round of this, you're not allowed to ask the same opponent a question. So this way we'll ensure spreading out the questions. We're going to start that off with Dave Yacovone. Dave, ask one of your opponents a question.
Thank you. Tyler, you clearly are a champion, for want of a better word, of local control, which I respect and agree in part with. Shannara has said in her literature that public education is bloated and inefficient. As you know, our local government oversees the spending of public education, K through 12 in Vermont. Has local government failed us in this regard, or is Shannara wrong?
I don't think local government has failed us at all. And again, I think if you look at a lot of what's happened in local communities, their hands are tied by laws that are passed in Montpelier dictating how they can spend education funds. If you look at education budgets, I'm more familiar with Cambridge's initially, but there was huge chunks of money in that budget, which is mandated spending, that you don't have the option, you don't have any discretion over over how you do that. And you also see that kind of too with, in contracts and a whole host of things. And again, I think the more of those decisions that you take away from people is, again, you get people that feel frustrated, that feel that they don't want to participate in the system, that the system isn't representing them. And I just feel very strongly that if we were to sit back and trust our local communities to actually be, to be reasonable and be able to come up with unique solutions to their own needs, I think we'll be actually quite pleasantly surprised with the results that we get. We have a beautiful federated system of government in this country. The states are supposed to be laboratories of democracies, and the localities are, again, even more so. And again, if Montpelier could just let go a little bit, and the state and the federal government, quite frankly, could relax a little bit and give states the power and authority to put their creative minds to work, I think we could really come up with some really interesting policy solutions.
Thank you, Tyler. Okay. Shannara Johnson, ask one of your opponents a question.
I would like to ask Dave a question. Dave, this June, the House passed a bill that says legislators will get a pay raise every time state employees get one starting next year. All Republicans voted no, almost all Democrats voted yes, including you and Avram. Many people thought passing that bill was kind of tone deaf, but my fellow candidate, John Lynch, had a fantastic idea. He called on all Republican House candidates to donate their pay raise if they get elected. Mine will go to the Morrisville Food Bank. Are you willing to pledge donating your pay raise, and who will it go to?
90 seconds.
Sure, thank you. We did not vote ourselves a pay raise, and I think you understand that. Historically, for many years, not forever, but for many years, legislative pay has increased when the pay of state employees increased. The vote before the legislature, which did not pass the full body, both chambers, was to tie future legislative wage increases to the same rate of percent as the constitutional officers. The intent, which I don't think was perhaps as effective as possible, was to try to gradually increase legislative pay so that people from all walks of life could participate in the legislative process. So that's an important distinction. Now, as far as donating pay, we'll likely if we don't receive assistance from the federal government, we'll likely be cutting legislative pay. So as to whom I give it to, I don't know. I don't know. I make many contributions. Some people can afford to donate some of their pay to people, and others can't. I think it's puts legislators in an awkward position if they're unable to do that. So I don't think I would champion that openly, though I might do it privately. Thank you.
Tyler Machia, choose an opponent and ask him or her a question.
Thank you, Mr. Patt. As you noted that you had mentioned that you were, a large supporter of, environmental policies. As am I. I'm kind of a Republican, I guess, that believes in conservation, stuff like that. I work as a fishing guide at the fly rod shop and stuff. It's hard to do that if there's no fish. My concern, though, is with the Global Warming Solutions Act, is that it just seems to be another attempt by the legislature to do an end around the legislative process to insulate themselves from having to take tough votes on policies that could potentially be unpopular, particularly taxes on new taxes on gasoline, home heating fuel, perhaps regulations as to the cutoff of when you may be able to sell, cars with combustion engines, similar to what California has recently enacted. Why do you feel that we need this climate council why wouldn't you want to take those votes on the floor?
Let me say this, there has been more deliberate misinformation about the Global Warming Solutions Act than pretty much any other piece of legislation that I have either been involved in the legislature or observing from outside. The council cannot pass regulations. Only state agencies can do that. The council cannot appropriate money or raise revenue. Only the legislature can do that. So if any of those things are required, it will have to go through the normal regulatory promulgation process. And I also want to point out that on the council are 8 of the council members are cabinet secretaries or department heads. The council is chaired by the Secretary of Administration, who, among other things, is the person that coordinates all of the actions of all of the agencies. So if the council makes recommendations, that still has to go through the normal regulatory process. Perhaps bills that legislation would need to pass, the legislature would have to vote on those things. If anything costs money, or if any revenue has to be raised, and I'm saying if, then only the legislature can do that. So it's
failing
just
to
not
adopt that, failing to do what you said would open the state up to lawsuit, because it's written into the bill that failure to enact the climate change plan opens the state up to lawsuit. So yes, you are correct in saying that it comes back, but I'm also correct in saying that there's essentially a gun held to the legislature's head that if they don't vote for this, the state's going to be opened up to lawsuit.
Can I address that, please?
Yeah, 20 seconds to answer that, Avram. Yep.
Okay. The lawsuit for any person can sue the state of Vermont now, anyone, about anything. Okay. What this bill does is it restricts and narrows what someone can bring legal action to the state. And if a judge rules that that's frivolous and there's no basis for that lawsuit, then that person or organization or whatever owes the state court costs. So this actually narrows what people can do compared to what is possible today, because on any issue, any person can sue the state of Vermont now.
But why do you need this? Why can't you just vote on each individual climate change individually?
We're going to cut it right there, folks. We have a lot of things to get to. So thank you. Thank you, Avram. Thank you, Tyler. Avram, it is your turn now to ask an opponent a question.
Okay, this is for Shannara Johnson. You said earlier today, and I've seen in some of your advertising and social media and other places, that we need to cut non-essential government services. And so my question is, who determines and how do you decide what's an essential service? Because what is essential to one person, it may not be essential to another, and vice versa. So is weatherizing people's homes an essential service? Is the Lamoille rail trail an essential service? Are childcare subsidies an essential service? How do you cut what you think are non-essential services when someone else is dependent on them?
Mhm. Okay, by non-essential, I mean, you know, it's about survival and somebody's basically holding a gun to your head. That's, you know, so anything that is not essential in that moment is non-essential. That's what I meant. So, you know, for example, the Global Warming Solutions Act is non-essential in that respect because we're going to need to survive in the next year. I mean, we're already in a deep recession. Some economists that I read on a regular basis say we're already in a depression. So this could be the second Great Depression, actually, we're looking at. And so ask yourself, I mean, if it's really the question, can we still put food on our table? Can we keep living in the house we're living in without getting evicted or our mortgage canceled and we lose the house? Can we still send our kids to school and give them clothing? Then pretty much everything else is non-essential, I would say.
Thank you, Shannara. Back to you, Jesse.
Okay, yes. Our turn to ask questions again. So this one is going to start with Shannara.
Mhm.
And the question is, our state has struggled in recent years with the high cost of living as exhibited in the cost of housing and childcare. How would you work to ensure those issues remain on the docket alongside COVID-19 setbacks? And you've got 2 minutes.
Okay. Well, of course, as I just said, you know, housing and childcare, that would be the essentials. So we definitely have to make sure that there's money for that. And I actually believe that in the federal budget for the COVID relief, there was money for that. So that means there should be still monies that can be given to people who are struggling with that. And but you know, the childcare thing comes back to the economy. If we fully reopen the economy, for example, we don't have as many people who have to stay at home with their kids because the kids can't go to school. They sit at home, they do the virtual learning, and the parents can't go anywhere and can't do anything because the kids are at home the whole time. And if those are little kids, obviously, you know, they need to be taken care of. And so if the parents can go back to work, I mean, so this is all like root causes, basically, you know, it's this vicious cycle. And when you basically go to the root cause and solve that, everything else is gonna solve itself.
Okay, thank you. Tyler, you're up next.
Could you just repeat the question, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So our state has struggled in recent years with the high cost of living as exhibited in the cost of housing and childcare. How would you work to ensure those issues remain on the docket alongside COVID-19 related setbacks?
Awesome. Great question. So first off, I'm going to get back to what I've been talking about is I think if we give local communities more ability to kind of ease restrictions on perhaps either some zoning restrictions, lot sizes, that sort of thing, we can reduce the costs for development of housing in this state. You know, I was very fortunate last year that I was able to purchase the house that I did. Given today's current economic climate, it's doubtful that I would do that. Another thing that's really important is the loss of in-home providers. As I said, I got an 8-month-old, and I can tell you one of my biggest struggles has been thus far as a new parent has been finding childcare with the restrictions that have been put on facilities and the loss of in-home providers, largely due, in fact, to increase in regulations. Now, I understand there's been a drive in this state to want to have high quality childcare, but it's gotten to the point now where you need to almost have a master's degree to be able to take care of kids. And not to say that we shouldn't offer our children, as high quality programs as we can, but we have been decimated in the loss of in-home providers. Where I grew up in Cambridge, there was at least 3 providers, none of whom are in business right now. And as someone who works, who's paycheck to paycheck like me, I need to be able to work. My wife needs to be able to work. And if we don't have a safe place where we can drop our kids off, that's a massive problem. So while I appreciate the attempt to create all these, to have a really robust and high quality childcare, at the end of the day, we need more of it, both in just, in terms of affordability. And I think that if we can ease some of those restrictions for in-home providers, we can maybe see a resurgence in that. And also takes us back to another problem that we have is, lack of planning in the state. And we can create problems that unintended problems that we have such as the benefits cliff, right? When we have top-down, one-size-fits-all decision-making that isn't responsive to local needs, it leads to problems like that where people get cut off from childcare, where programs are designed that are top-down, one-size-fits-all and aren't nuanced. And I think that we really need to take the time to bring it back home to local communities and create better programs. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Avram, you're up next.
I guess I would just want to mention another angle, which is we can talk about the high cost or the affordability problems around housing or childcare or other things. The flip side of that is people's incomes. If people had more income, if they got paid more, if they had more better benefits, then that would lessen the affordability problem, including more pay, higher pay for childcare workers, both home-based and in centers. So the income gap in Vermont and in the rest of the country just keeps growing and growing and growing. And so people are basically in the lower 80% of income levels are treading water or losing ground. So that I see this as much as an income problem as an affordability problem.
You're going to round out this question.
Did you call on me?
Yes.
Thank you. I assumed that, but we have to be realistic. If people want good childcare, if they want in-home providers, they have to be paid more. You could eliminate all the regulations you want, and you wouldn't be able to significantly increase the pay. That takes tax revenues. And I'm not sure letting our local communities figure out how to come up with that revenue to pay them would be much of a solution. To Shannara's point that we've got a lot of federal dollars that went into childcare, we did. We've put $50 million into childcare, but it has to be spent by December 30th, or it goes back to the federal government. What happens after that money is gone? Tell me the essential services that will be cut to help childcare to take care of the Tylers and his family, at which they certainly need help with. You'd have to cut a lot more than the Global Warming Fund, which over 2 years is less than $900,000 to solve that. So I believe Vermont will be okay going forward. If we get the federal help, we'll definitely be okay. But we also have over $200 million in reserves because we've been smart. We've put money away during the good times. Now, believe me, I'm the last person who wants to spend that. But if we have to, we're looking at a gap of approximately $104 million for next year's budget. We've got 200 million. We can be smart, we can be sensible, so that the essential services, the people giving care in our nursing homes, the people providing the child care, the state police coverage, the state colleges can stay in the game and be stabilized. It'll be complex and it'll take experience to solve it. Thank you.
You.
Okay. This question, we start with Tyler. Tyler, Vermont has been able to turn things like craft beer and cider into tax generators and tourism engines for the state. As the state perhaps moves to some sort of cannabis marketplace, what can the state do to make sure that Vermont farmers are able to participate in legalized cannabis farming and create some sort of Vermont brand in order that large out-of-state cannabis companies, corporations even, don't swoop in and take over?
Well, I think an essential element of that is, again, to try and keep is we want to make sure that we have as many regulations in place to kind of that don't favor large businesses. And that's the problem, again, with centralized decision making, is it benefits people who have the money, time, and resources to play the game, right? The more decision making that you put in Montpelier, it empowers more lobbyists, it empowers special interests who sit in committees week in and week out and work and craft legislation. And I think that was some of the governor's reservations, at least with the recent cannabis law that was passed, is that it didn't go far enough to addressing issues of racial disparity. Personally, I'm in favor of recreational marijuana. I've been a bartender for many years. I worked at a wedding and event space in Jeffersonville for a long time, and I think that the craft, there is enormous potential in there for that to be done. But again, I think we just have to let it grow organically, and the more we try and regulate it, the more we try and put more and more requirements on it, is again that type of, it's going to throw up a big burden for the people who don't have the time or money and resources to play in that system. And that's kind of why I'm a real strong believer that decisions based on especially on cannabis or whatever it is should be done at least at a local and regional level, because it makes it much more accessible to the everyday person. It makes it much harder for a lobbyist or another interested group to have to go to 5 different places to get what they want than to go to one place in Montpelier. And again, I think that recreational cannabis, and I think it is going to could potentially be something good for the state in the future. Again, so long as we're not selling to kids and that sort of thing. And again, I'm a very big civil libertarian. As long as it's not hurting anybody else, like I said, I'm really a firm believer in that, adults, grown citizens should have the ability to more or less do what they want to do with their lives. Government can stay out of that.
Thank you, Tyler. Let it grow organically, he says. We have Avram. How would you ensure that Vermont farmers can participate in legalized cannabis farming and create a Vermont brand for it?
Well, first of all, I think they can. I know there are people who felt that small producers or retailers were being shut out. I don't think that is necessarily the case. But with that said, this is the bill that passed, which took an awful lot of work by a number of very different committees looking at all aspects of this, is an incredibly complicated bill. And we all know that we will have to revisit some issues and work on them again and finish working on them. There was a big issue at the very end of the session about whether or not advertising could be allowed. But there have to be a lot of regulations about this to protect young people, particularly adolescents who, as we know, their brains can be very negatively affected by cannabis, and we need to make sure that businesses, whether they're Vermont-based or owned from out of state, are complying and controlling the dosage in manufactured products, so that doesn't become dangerous. So there is going to be a lot of work over the next 2 years before you actually have a market. The market does not start tomorrow. There's a process in place for getting the market up, and I am sure there will be changes and tweaks in the future. And certainly among legislators, there's certainly sympathy for making sure that this benefits local Vermont growers and small businesses.
Thank you, Avram. Dave Yacovone. Same question.
It's a great opportunity, Tommy, for agriculture to really thrive and succeed in this market, as hemp will be too, as we work out the market. But we need to have consistent regulation. Again, if you rely on local control to deal with the marijuana market, imagine the quality issues. You have to set standards across the board statewide. You can't have one local community say, you know, you can have this much TAC, and another one say, oh no, you can have this much TAC. You then run into some huge quality problems that just don't work. So we're going to start this out with a cannabis control board, and their goal is to try to do their very best to make sure that small farmers and not the corporations succeed with this. We also have, while this isn't directly to your question, there is a very strong effort to use the revenues that are generated for prevention to help with children specifically to understand the pros and cons of this. So I think it's exciting. Some 80,000 Vermonters, according to the CDC, and some people perhaps don't like to believe the CDC, but the CDC has said 80,000 Vermonters use marijuana on a daily basis in Vermont. So you can, with that, and by getting better regulations around this, I think we'll all be better off. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Shanara Johnson, your thoughts on empowering farmers so that they can farm cannabis?
So yes, I totally agree that we should keep the big corporations and the lobbyists out of it. And I think what we could do is give small farmers here in Vermont tax incentives and tax advantages over other producers so that they basically can have cannabis on their farms. I also think I'm actually for this legislation too, because I think drug-related crime will drop. For example, the recent 3 shootings in Burlington, I believe, were drug-related. Those were actually from basically drug gang members that came up from Boston, and I'm sure there was heroin in the game or any in play. But still, I think at least it's a little piece of the drug trade that would be taken off of, you know, the crime rings and the cartels and stuff. And I'm a little afraid of over-regulation, because regulation is good and necessary, but you can overdo it, like we see with Act 250. I mean, I talked to local real estate people, and they said that so many businesses basically throw in the towel because they have to jump through so many hoops with Act 250. And even local farmers, they can't do with their land, with their own land, what they want to do. For example, I heard a story recently of somebody who wanted to open up a truck stop and was told that due to Act 250, it would be $100,000 for the permits and 2 years of time. And he went over the border to New Hampshire and said, hey, what do I have to do to open a truck stop? And they said, well, give me $40 and sign that form here. So, I mean, guess where people will go. And I really hope it's not going to be it's not going to turn out to be the same thing with the cannabis farming.
Thank you, Shanara. Great.
Okay, so now you get to ask each other questions again. Please remember you can't ask the person that you asked last time. And for those answering questions, you'll have just 90 seconds. So we're going to start this round with Avram.
Okay, so this question's for Tyler. We talked earlier about what's going on in Washington, and that aside from the current emergency COVID-19 fund, but on an ongoing basis, there are significant efforts to cut back all kinds of federal funding for things that benefit Vermonters and that Vermonters depend on, and at the same time to unravel and undo environmental regulations and other regulations that protect health and safety of Vermonters as well as people elsewhere. So if that continues to happen, what do you think, can Vermont do anything about that? Should Vermont do anything about that? Should we try to make up for shortfalls in federal funding or shortfalls in federal regulation that used to exist but don't anymore? I mean, how do we respond, or do we just kind of let it happen?
No, what I think we do is, again, is we go back to communities and we work with them to try and find some unique solutions to their problems. For example, while we're trying to spend upwards of $1 million creating the Climate Change Council, what we should do is take that money and invest in our local conservation districts. I've had the privilege, again, being lifelong hunter and angler, I really care deeply about ensuring that we have clean air, clean water, and access for public lands for people to go out and recreate, be it hunting, fishing, or otherwise. I had the privilege this summer to help plant some trees along the Wild Branch in heading up towards Greensboro. We planted in 2 hours over 200 trees, and the cost for that was under $1,000. If you were to take that $1 million that you're spending right now in the Global Warming Solutions Act and give it to these groups, and they can do projects on the ground tomorrow, which will actually have direct impact on helping the environment, to be it through containing soil erosion along your riverbanks, through carbon capture from the actual trees itself, and from reductions in runoff through having riparian areas that will protect that. And again, this is just an area, if we say this is what we need to do, we're going to give localities the money to help do it and create institutions, kind of like what we have with the Vermont Council on Rural Development, create panels and see where people can have resources to address their own problems. You're going to have more engaged citizens. You're going to have people that want to participate in it, that feel that they're actively engaged in it. And I think you're going to have better policy outcomes. The more dependent you are on waiting for Washington, D.C. or Montpelier to come ride in on their white horse and save you, as I think you're going to just be disappointed time and time and time again, because centralized, big moneyed interests are going to win out. And they have won out for years, and they continue to do it. So I think the more we can take that power and put it back in the hands of people, the better the solutions that we're going to have.
Okay, thank you, Ted. Next, we're going to go to Dave. So you get to ask your question.
I think I have to ask Shannara this time because I asked Tyler the last time.
You can ask me again.
Shannara, you mentioned a couple of essential services. I think you mentioned childcare. I think you mentioned housing. What about healthcare? What would you as a legislator do if President Trump is successful before the Supreme Court and the Affordable Care Act is overturned and 22,000 Vermonters lose over $100 million a year in subsidies to pay for their private insurance?
Okay. Well, first of all, let me tell you, Vermont healthcare doesn't work very well. I mean, Vermont Health Connect is an absolute disaster. I once switched from being an employee to a self-employed person, and it took them 5 months to figure it out and to adjust. I mean, it was unbelievable. So that's one thing. First of all, I think that President Trump has rolled out a really good healthcare proposal recently that will give every American more choice, lower costs, better care. Since 2017, the number of Medicare Advantage plans available has gone up. There's now an average of over 74 plan choices. 94% of Medicare Advantage plans are now offering telehealth, which is super important, especially with people who'd rather stay at home or who are among the vulnerable population. Prescription drug prices have been dropping. We're going to be able now to import low-cost prescription drugs from Canada and other countries, including low-cost insulin. Workers will get more insurance options, including patients with pre-existing conditions. I mean, there's so much going on right now. And I think the first step to actually put more money into people's pockets to actually pay for healthcare too is remove the tax on Social Security income, because we're one of only 13 US states that tax Social Security income, and that would make a huge difference. I know that Governor Scott already proposed an income tax exemption in 2018 that gives 40,000 Vermonters more of their Social Security benefits, but that was only for low-income Vermonters. We need it for everybody because the middle class always gets the short end of the stick here.
Okay, thank you, Shannara. And keep talking because it's your turn to ask a question.
Well,
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry to clarify though, I didn't
Yes.
hear what would happen to the 22,000 Vermonters. Maybe I missed it, but thank you.
Okay, we're going to keep going in the effort of time. So, Shannara, question. Who would you like to answer it?
Well, I'm going to ask Avram now. So you voted yes on Avram. I'm sorry, I mispronounced your name.
All right.
So you voted yes on the Prop 5 amendment to the Vermont Constitution that allows abortion up to the moment of birth. Even if Roe versus Wade were ever overturned, it would really just put the responsibility back with the individual states. So why did the House find it necessary to make this a foundational document?
It was basically to maintain Vermont's ability to protect itself from restrictions that could very well happen from the federal level in the Supreme Court, from among other places, or in statute, which Congress could pass. And I think that's the basic feeling, was that there was a real sense that a woman's right to have an abortion was something that people felt strongly about, and that we needed to assure that in the event politicians in Washington, as they said they wanted to, were going to take that right away at a national level, that if Vermont could do something to protect against that, that was the purpose in that.
But as they said, I'm sorry, I want to follow up. Basically, if Roe v. Wade was ever overturned, which is not very likely, the responsibility would just go back to the states and they could do whatever they wanted.
So, Avram, you have 20 seconds for your follow-up. You've got 20 seconds left.
Congress can pass a law that says that states can't do that. That's all.
Okay. Thank you. And to finish up the Ask Your Opponent section, we're going to go to Tyler.
Thank you. David, one of the things you had really, you had mentioned before was your, your commitment to service and stuff like that, and having people be able to participate, which, I certainly appreciate. But I do have a question again as to why then you would have both voted for Act 46, which in many ways would restricted the public's ability and local communities' ability to have impact on education decisions. And also the Global Warming Solutions Act. Like, I'm struggling to see the necessity of why you would need to spend upwards of $1 million, granted over 2 years, but it's still $1 million in today's budget climate, to do something that the legislature can do right now. You can take votes right now on any of the number of things. There's plenty of policies out there on things that you want to take on that would reduce climate emissions. Why not just take the votes on the floor? Why have this commission to begin with?
Thank you. I couldn't quite hear the beginning, Tyler. Did you say, why did I vote for Act 46?
Well, just with your commitment, saying that you appreciated people participating in service, and saying that by, consolidating school boards and putting more of that decision-making power in the State Board of Education, it seemed to cut out the public in a large way from that process. And I was just curious how you would reconcile that. And also a similar theme, that theme of carries through in the Global Warming Solutions Act again, where we see this a quasi, a board which given broad authority to take pretty aggressive actions to look at our state policies as far as climate change legislation goes, and it isn't accountable.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for that clarification. So I did not vote for Act 46. I wasn't in the legislature. I did vote to overturn it, to eliminate it, not because of the structure per se, but because I believe small schools are vital to rural Vermont. Imagine trying to sell your 2 or 3 bedroom house and there's no school in your town. We'll have, and I believe so much in that. And on the Appropriations Committee, I've fought very hard for the small school grants to preserve that. So just to clarify that. But there's a distinction though with the Global Warming Solutions Act. The reason we need it is that we don't have a plan. If you think COVID has been difficult on us, it's a dress rehearsal for what will happen when climate change comes. Clearly, we owe it to our children. We owe it to the future to have a strong plan to mitigate the best we can the impacts of climate change. Without it, we will have failed them. Now, you alluded earlier to the Green Mountain Care Board. The Vermont uses councils and boards throughout government to help us operate. If we didn't have those, we'd need a full-time 12-month-a-year legislature to do that work. So it simply comes down to, with something as critical as our future, we must have a plan. And I'm willing to invest in it to have that plan. Thanks for the question.
Okay, thanks, Dave.
Brief follow-up.
Nope, we're gonna keep moving.
Thanks, guys. All right, back to questions from us. This one, we start with Dave Yacovone. Dave, there had been expectations for some substantial changes to Act 250, Vermont's land use law. The slimmed down version is all that came out of it. And it was passed and didn't get across the governor's desk, largely dealing with forest fragmentation. Was that sufficient? And if not, what other changes to Act 250 would you pursue?
It was not sufficient. It was a disappointment that we were not able to go much farther than we did. And I along with the governor and many others, I hope we can work at this in January, those who are returned to the legislature in the upcoming session, to continue to make changes in the process to help mitigate it. There's a word I use called enviroeconomy. The two need to be in balance with each other. I'm confident we can preserve the beauty of Vermont, the open spaces, our rural landscape. We can make sure our water is clean and our air is pure without strangling us with regulations. It's not easy, but I'm confident and we need to do that. Now, there's nothing wrong. It's complex when we talk about forest defragmentation and fragmentation, excuse me. I'm thinking of fracking a little bit. That's an important concept that certainly needs to be worked on in the future. We lost 14,000 acres last year of our forest to development. Now, in truth, sure, we have over 4 million acres of forests in Vermont, but the forests are key for climate change going forward. They're key for our rural character in a number of ways. So the fragmentation can truly help to benefit our forests and still allow careful and thoughtful development. So like many others, Tommy, I hope we can do more, and I was willing to take some change, as incremental as it was, versus none at all. Thank you.
Thank you. Shannara, same question for you, please.
Well, I'm extremely amazed, but I 100% agree with Dave. And No, it's really true. I mean, everybody wants to preserve Vermont's pristine nature, obviously. Nobody, wants billboards everywhere along the highway. Nobody wants, terrible looking landscapes full of high rises and I don't know what. But as Dave already said, I mean, it can be done without going completely overboard and regulating us to death. And that's what's happening right now. When I was talking to this real estate person from Morrisville, he also mentioned that Act 250 is terrible for affordable housing. And I mean, we're really shooting ourselves in the foot here. And some of those regulations just have to be peeled back and loosened.
Thank you, Shannara. Tyler Machia.
I just want to rephrase the question. Just read the question to me again one more time, please.
Sure. There had been some expectations of some substantial changes to Act 250, and not much came out of the legislature this year. And what did come out largely dealt with forest fragmentation. I just want to know if you think that was sufficient, and if not, what other changes to Act 250?
No, it wasn't sufficient at all, and I shared the governor's concern with that. That I think initially there was a lot of hope and promise with Act 250 reform. I mean, you had the governor and the Vermont National Resources Council more or less on the same page regarding, and had put together a robust proposal to begin with. I had some issues with it. I didn't like the fact that they got rid of the regional commissions because, again, as the theme has been throughout my campaign, is I think those decisions should be made locally. But again, giving flexibility to communities to be able to exempt certain areas or certain projects from development, I think is strong for is going to be really important for economic growth going forward. The state right now with COVID, we arguably face the worst financial crisis that the state has faced in its entire history. And I think we're going to need to look long and hard about how we can reinvigorate our local economies. And I see giving flexibility and some exemptions to Act 250 as key to doing that. Again, I support the governor on that. I was very happy to receive his endorsement last week. And again, I would look forward to giving the opportunity served to find ways that we can reduce some of the regulations with Act 250 while still preserving local communities' ability to have input on the process. Because again, I wouldn't want to see a top one committee in the state making decisions for the whole state. I think it's important to allow that there's regional, there's issues vary by region. We need to take that into account. So again, for further regulation, for reducing regulations, but again, want to keep the local councils.
Great, thank you. Okay. Avram.
Yeah. Yes, it was disappointing after all of the work that had been done by so many different people, both legislators in the House and Senate, as well as various parties that had an interest in this from different perspectives. A lot of work got put into it. Nevertheless, I was disappointed and just did not understand the need to veto what did pass in the end, because I think there was agreement among the House and Senate that was, despite all of the things that people couldn't agree with, there was agreement on that, and I didn't see, and why not let it go through? Why make a point of vetoing it? I don't get that. This is an example I referred to earlier about the frustrations and the hurry up and wait and the compromises that have to get made in order to pass major legislation. And this is major. There are many pieces that affect all kinds of people, and sometimes, and I've experienced this myself, even though I wasn't on a committee that dealt with that bill, but on other things, where you put a year or two of work into a bill, work out and come to agreement with people you started out disagreeing with, and then for one reason or another, it all goes up in flames in the last 2 weeks of the session. And sometimes you start all over again, sometimes with some new faces involved. And eventually, I do think there will be some meaningful modernization and streamlining of Act 250, because everybody agrees that that needs to happen. So I think it will.
Thank you, Avram.
We're going to start with Shannara. How should Vermont address systemic racism? Should the state be looking at reforms to law enforcement protocol and training? If so, what do you think those reforms should entail? And you've got 2 minutes.
Okay, to me, those are actually two different questions. First of all, I think police should definitely be better trained with an eye on de-escalation training. And maybe social workers should be added to police departments and ride with officers to certain calls. But I would not consider replacing police officers with social workers. I think that is a terrible, terrible idea. So about systemic racism, it all depends on how you define systemic racism. If you ask me about institutional racism, I don't believe in it because it's nowhere on the laws that Black Americans are disadvantaged in any way at this time. Of course, there used to be laws, but not anymore. If you define systemic racism as a collective hereditary guilt, I don't believe in that. And that's also the Constitution, for example, actually forbids to punish the family members of a declared traitor. So our social contract is not really, doing this collective hereditary guilt thing. And then the other thing is, what I thought was interesting was that one of my fellow candidates, Alice Flanders, said that the only racism she as a person of color has ever encountered in Vermont was when liberals insisted that she as a person of color should view herself as a victim and act the part. And I call this, and it has been called, I didn't coin this, the soft racism of low expectations. And I see that a lot from the left because some of the social programs treat Black Americans like they're kids. And they try to perpetuate the victim mentality. And I think the right thing to do is to empower Black people, to give them economic incentives and opportunities, tools for success, and teach them how to fish instead of handing them the fish.
Thank you. Tyler, you're next on this one.
As an angler myself, I have to really agree with Shannara on that last statement about empowerment. So again, I think, it goes without saying that, racism is kind of America's original sin. It's the America that we've always struggled with is the America that's in the Constitution and the America of ideals, and then the practice, right? The same men that wrote all men are created equal, many of them themselves actually owned slaves as property. So we've been struggling with that and have paid quite a high price in blood, quite through the Civil War, civil rights era, and to today, to try and rectify that. Again, I'm a real strong advocate for protecting people's civil liberties, be it the First and Second Amendments. And I think what you're really seeing with the Black Lives Matter movement is a group of people that are using their collective voice to say, we are not happy with the way in which we are being policed. And again, that gets back to kind of some of the other issues I've been talking about with centralization of power and decision-making, right? Again, I think we need to do more engaging the community in a creative way and having more policing decisions made locally. Because again, the more those decisions get made further away from people, people don't feel like they're being represented. They don't feel like they're being heard. They feel like they're being talked down to. And again, it creates an adversarial relationship. And I don't think that that's how that's supposed to work. Again, if we empower local communities, to work together to address issues of policing, I think we can, like I said, we can address a lot of these problems. And I'm just a firm believer in that. Again, like if we need to really rethink the role of how we do government and the way it is. And again, if we can put more power in the hands of local communities, I think we're going to have better policing outcomes and more accountable policing practices and better policy overall.
Okay, thank you. Avram?
I certainly agree that in terms of the policing aspects of it, that we do need to put more focus on the de-escalation of conflict. And that goes for people color, as well as the people with mental health issues, who sometimes end up being hurt or killed as a result of police action. When if we had people who could, both by training of police officers as well as other professionals, if we can de-escalate situations and get people to step back from the crisis, that will go a long way. I think that the training for law enforcement in Vermont needs to be it needs to be across the board. We have different organizations that are involved in law enforcement, the state police, the sheriff's offices, local police departments, and others, and they need to have the same or very similar standards so that the treatment of people doesn't differ in Bennington versus Morrisville or Barry. So that's what I would say about that. There are other forms of systemic racism besides law enforcement, but I think that we see inadvertently happening in other aspects of our government and public life.
Dave.
Thank you. I'd like to reframe this a little bit, and I'm not sure I have any answers on this. It's been said before, but I think bears repeating. The real law lives in the kindness of our hearts. If our hearts are empty, no laws or political reforms can fill them. Children are not born hateful. Hate is a learned condition. How do we fill empty hearts? How do we strengthen families to create nurturing atmospheres where love prevails? I believe in the doctrine of kindness. Now, to promote that and to make it happen is the real challenge, I think. I think we need investments in programs like Head Start that build strong families. We need Success by 6. We need strong parent-child centers to help strengthen families, to build resiliency. Because if we can help children grow up loving others, then down the road, the tragedies that we've seen all too many of, I think, will be diminished. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, this next question's going to be first asked to Tyler Machia. Tyler, last month, the State Board of Education approved the first Act 46 divorce, allowing the previously merged southern Vermont towns of Reedsboro and Halifax to go their own ways when it comes to education governance. Some people think that this may have opened the door for the legislature to step in and have a say in keeping Act 46 mergers intact. Knowing how divisive the forced merger between Stowe and Elmore Morristown School District was over the past 2 years, and with your district in particular, it's also a big deal in Worcester. What role should the legislature play in revisiting Act 46 at this point?
I think you should let the districts that want to dissolve the merger. Again, because the way that this law was written, again, Elmore and Morristown Stowe had worked out an alternative agreement that would have met most of the criteria in Act 46, but because it wasn't what the State Board of Education deemed was the state plan, it was ignored and was overridden, and the districts were merged together. And look, again, at the end of the day, personally, I think it should be left up to the voters at this point. I was very happy to see that those communities were decided to take it upon themselves to take that action. And look, we've been merged now at this point. Let the people vote on it. If they've been merged now and they don't feel like that it's working for them, you should let them dissolve. Because again, This process is, again, it's top down, one size fits all governance. And I just don't think that that's appropriate. And again, given Vermont's strong tradition of local control, I don't think you should take those decisions away from local people, because it throws up barriers to access. People get involved a lot of times in their schools through being in civic life, through participating on their school board, being involved in that. And the fewer avenues you get to that, you have a less engaged citizenry. We have a very special thing in this state. The fact that people, everyday people, can have the amount of impact that they can through town meeting day and participation and the ease of access to the legislature is almost unheard of in any other state. And the more we move away from that, I think the worse our politics is going to get. And I think the worse our civic participation is going to get. If given the opportunity, I'd fight against that. And again, I support giving local communities the decision. If they want to vote to move out of it, they should be given that freedom. The legislature should stay out.
Tyler? Avram, same question to you.
Okay. First of all, in terms of the Lamoille-Washington district, we actually have 4 towns in 3 different forced merger situations. In addition to Worcester, also Woodbury in another district. So Dave and I were hearing from a lot of people during that. I'll say first of all that in terms of the Elmore Morrisville Stowe merger, what dismayed me about the state board's decision there was that the state board clearly had the ability and the authority in law to approve the alternative that those communities had come up with, and the working relationship they had, and they chose not to, and they did not have to. So that was very disturbing. I do think, as with other big and complicated issues, that there will need to be some revisiting and reworking of that law, so that where it is working, where communities have decided this is actually a good thing, then fine, and where it was a mistake that was forced on communities, they need to be able to undo that.
Thank you, Avram. Dave Yacovone, same question, please.
I'm going to save us a lot of time on the clock and say, I agree with what Tyler said.
Thank you, Dave.
That's fine. Yeah, we'll bank some time.
Give
Can I take it?
me some time at the end, a little extra. No,
I can take it for you, Dave. It's no
just
problem.
kidding.
We can just all go home with it. Shannara, same question to you. Ought the legislature be able to
Yeah, I get
take
the
Back
question.
46 again?
Yeah, I think all 4 of us totally agree on this, that the forced mergers were just a really bad idea, and that local communities should have the power to undo them if they feel that that's the right thing to do. And harping again on my vibrant economy theme here, I think if we want to attract new people, new businesses, and so forth to Vermont and create a vibrant economy, that also includes attracting young families with kids. And would you move to a town that doesn't even have a school, like no elementary school? I don't think so. And so, I think it's just a mandatory thing that those mergers need to be repealed at one point or another.
Well, I apologize for making you all agree with each other.
Not how we're supposed to do a debate.
Sorry.
You could just start shouting if that make you guys feel better.
It would.
Or have a
Yeah.
flag on one of your heads.
I'd like to point out to Mr. Gardner that most of us are already home anyway.
That's a good point. Sorry.
You're basically home. Yeah. Okay, so we've reached the time. Closing statements are here. We're going to go in reverse alphabetical time, and you're going to have just 1 minute. So say it fast. Dave, we're going to start with you.
Thank you. Our measure of success as a society has little to do with the wealth we might acquire, the possessions we might accumulate, or the power we might amass. In the end, what matters most is how we care for those who are the frailest and most vulnerable among us. You have two votes now and on November 3rd. I hope I can have one of them. If you want a trusted voice with experience, who's passionate about helping others, I hope you'll support me. Thank you.
Avram.
Thank you. We obviously are living in a very deeply troubled world and nation right now, but I come from a family and a background that really truly believe that things, better things are possible, that a better world is possible. As a legislator, I use my experience, some common sense, and I do think I have some. And I seek common ground with others. I learn from others who know more about a particular thing than I do, or vice versa. And we work together in the legislature, and we do good work for Vermont. And I would appreciate the opportunity to be one of the two legislators that continues to serve our district, our communities in the House of Representatives. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Tyler.
Well, to paraphrase David a little bit, if you do the same thing, you're going to get the same result. And I think if we look at what we've seen in Montpelier over the last couple of years, we've really seen, again, a dramatic increase in the size, scope, and power of state government. And what I'm offering you is, I can promise you, I will fight as hard as I can, day in and day out, to ensure that local communities and locals' voices are heard, and that we can have accountable local decision making, not one size fits all top down mandates from Montpelier. Again, I've really appreciated my time to be able to, to talk to everybody here tonight. I thought we've had a really good discussion. I also appreciate everybody that I've talked to on the campaign trail today. I've been really blown away with the positive receptions that I've been receiving, and I just hope that I can earn one of your votes. And I would love the pleasure of serving all of you. Thank you.
Great, thanks. I'm not running for anything, but I agree that we've had a really good discussion tonight. Thank you all for participating. And finally, with 1 minute on the clock is Shannara.
I was going to say, don't forget me here.
No.
So yes, I would like to be a force of unity, not this division. And I would also like to be a force of order, not chaos. And I think we've had way too much chaos recently. And I actually believe that decent, law-abiding Americans of all colors, of all creeds, of all sexual orientations can come together and work together to get through those tough economic times that the COVID lockdowns have created. And I believe that true equality comes from creating liberty, justice, and economic opportunity for all in one nation under God. And I would be happy to serve you if you think that you want to support that. Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, folks. That concludes 2 full nights, 12 different candidates, 4 different Lamoille County districts, and ending on the biggest one of all, where in a normal world, you'd be knocking on doors in towns that you couldn't even get to from one town. You can't get to Woodbury from Morristown. I wish we could all be in the same room, say the People's Academy Auditorium again, maybe one of these days again, but thanks for participating in this virtual world. I'm gonna steal a line from Dave, who's want to quote a lot of people. I'm gonna quote Bill S. Preston, Esquire, and Ted Theodore Logan. Be excellent to each other, everybody. Thank you.
One correction, you can get to West Woodbury from Elmore.
You can. That's right. In a car, or do you need hiking boots?
No, in a car. There's about 20, 25 houses there.
Okay, that's correct. All right, stand corrected.
Be well, everybody.
Thank you.
Signing out.
Thank you, Tommy's time. Being
Thank you,
Good night.
awesome.
Jesse.
Bye.